Hello everybody, Tom Ellsworth here, and welcome back to Case Studies with the BizDoc. Today we're going to look at the origins of the game studio Valve and their classic game Half-Life. You know, there's a lot of things you can learn from them, and one of the things I learn is listen to the audience, and you ask for a case study on gaming. Someday, maybe we'll do something on Riot, because a couple of you asked about Riot and all the gaming tournaments, everything they're doing at Madison Square Garden. But today, we're going to go back to the origins of PC gaming and a defining moment in PC gaming that I'm sure all you remember. And we're going to look at what made Valve and what made Half-Life and how they changed the playing field for everyone. And today, there's going to be three things we're going to learn along the way. Point one. Passion is indispensable. If you don't have passion for the sector you're diving into, you don't have anything to start with. You don't have a start. Second, when entering a sector, you need to network with everybody and know everything there is to know about that sector. If it's a sector you're passionate about, learn everything. As a quick aside, I was once at UCLA on a panel with Mark Cuban, and somebody said, "Hey, I love this and I love that and I want to dive into it." And Mark said, "Stop until you know everything about that sector, why they make money, how they make money, who the big players are, how they got there, what they do, and why it's that way today. If you don't know all of that and know it cold and be the smartest guy in the room when you enter the sector because you researched, don't enter the sector." Third, listen, if your product is late, it's late only till the day it's released. Then it's out and rolling. But if it sucks, it'll suck forever. So always put out product that's great. So let's dive into Valve, shall we? So Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington were early guys at Microsoft. They had made some money on Microsoft because Microsoft was in its heyday and they were there programming Windows and other things. But they had a passion, and the passion was to create a gaming company. Now, they knew a lot about software, but they had never built gaming software. So they knew they had to go figure some things out. So with this wealth and this passion, they went out to get knowledge. And along the way, they get connected to John Carmack. John Carmack is one of the legends of id, the makers of Doom and Quake. And he recommended to them, why don't you take the Quake Engine and follow your passion to build a game, but build it on the Quake Engine. That way you don't have to build an engine. You can build your narrative, your story arcs, your character, everything that you're putting together, build it on the engine. It'll save a couple steps. And they were very excited about this and said, you know what, I think we're going to do that. So they built the company, and they were signing documents and getting it all together. And as the story goes, those documents were actually signed on the day of Newell's wedding. Imagine that was popular with the bride, but nonetheless, the company was born. Shortly thereafter, the name Valve came out of it. They had a couple other names that they had messed around with, like I think it was like Star Rhino and some other things. But Valve, they had opened the valve on creativity. And that's just such a strong, strong name for the company, I think. Well, there you have a company legally born, and they've got the Quake Engine. So where do they go from here? They had this financial freedom to do what they wanted, and rather than sail around the world, they really wanted to build a company that gave the culture and gave the feeling for a place that they would want to work. So I imagine that that is something that we all can learn, that when you build a company, whatever you're doing, you build a place that you like to work at and you follow your passion for that. And I think that's probably an important little mini learning that we have along the way here. Nonetheless, they went out to hire a team. And they didn't just hire experienced gamers. They hired people that were creative, and they figured that they would teach them along the way and kind of inculcate them into what was going to be the culture of Valve. Next up was to find a publisher. Now in the gaming world, a publisher is similar to a book publisher or a record label. A band needs to find a record label, an aspiring author needs to find a book publisher. Well, guess what? A game studio has to find a publisher that's going to take you to market it, have relationships with all the various stores to get you on the shelf. So you need each other, just like music or books. So they go out to find a publisher. Well, game publishers are a little wary of game studios because game studios are run by gamers. Gamers are passionate about the software, passionate about the game, and absolutely famous for being late. They're equally famous for being finicky and tough to work with. So when you're signing a first-time studio to a publishing deal, you got to know what you got, and you got to be careful with it. So usually publishers are hard to break into for gamers with an idea. And Lord knows there's tons of gamers out there with an idea that was going to be the next Quake or the next EverQuest. Nonetheless, Sierra Online actually signs him to a deal, even though gamers are famous for being finicky and famous for being late. Hey, Paul, when you were working and doing the facial animation stuff for Rockstar, were they ever late?
Absolutely. If it's on time, the game typically sucks.
There it is. If the game's on time, it probably sucks because they're spending all the time being late, making the game great. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the world of games. And that was one of the things that Sierra Online was concerned about. So they only signed him to a one-game deal. Okay, let's see if we can do this Half-Life thing, and we'll see where it goes, and let's figure this out. So Sierra Online signs him, but they hedged their bet a little bit. They only gave him a one-game deal because they're a brand new studio and they don't know much about them. But you're always taking a risk. If you think about it like in terms of music, if you were a record label and you signed Magic to one album, you probably made a smart decision because they never backed up Rude. However, if you signed Deer Hunter to one album, you screwed up because they're a free agent after that first album and they're going to get signed by somebody else. So you always have that risk in signing a game studio, just like signing a musician. You just never know what you got. Nonetheless, Sierra Online takes the guys from Valve and Half-Life in 1997 in May of the year to E3. And there is no bigger confab for gamers than May of every year, E3 in Los Angeles, the Electronic Entertainment Expo. And there they go. And the response to Half-Life was tremendous. People around the show, have you seen that? Have you seen that? Go over to Sierra Online and see that. They knew they had a hit. But they also knew they had a new studio that had never actually done what we call shipped product, and that would be a correct assumption. In the fall of the year, Valve would say, it's not ready yet and we're not going to ship it. In the meanwhile, Sierra Online had already started marketing. So they've already started marketing for this. And the only thing that held this relationship together, that kept Sierra Online from tearing up the contract, was because they knew that they had a great game because they saw all the response that they had gotten at E3. And they saw the response that the critics have. They said, that's different, that's new, that's going to be outrageous. So away we go, and Valve decides to do more than just deliver a game late. They actually throw away some of the code and they recode part of the game. Why? Because they're passionate about a perfect product. And they have been learning things along the way and learning things about what they could do with the Quake Engine and make it better and make it ever more perfect. So here we go into 1998, after Sierra Online has the heart attack of the holiday selling season of 1997 because they had no game to put out there and they had to pull all their marketing back. And it's going to be out in the spring of 1998. Wait. I mean the summer of 98. Wait. I mean the fall of 1998. And all of a sudden it's November of 1998. And then the internet took over. And let me tell you a little side story. Many of you may not remember this, but between 1994 and 1996, there was two browsers out there. First was Mosaic browser, which led to the Netscape browser. Well, at that time, the internet was still kind of a baby, but the browser gave us all this ability to go farther and do more faster on the internet. The internet was also largely geeky and techie at the time, just like gamers were geeky and techie. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, it's important, and here's why. Right before the release of Half-Life, finally really going to come out in November, there's a leak on the internet of a version of the game, and everybody gets to look at it. And the techie community who's using these early browsers to make use of the internet, they see it and they go nuts, and the rumors go nuts. And you know what? It was more hype in launch marketing than a marketing staff could ever dream of. The hype was unbelievable. And when the game came out in November and everybody got to see it live, it was stupendous. It blew the lid off, and it was the game of the year. One of the things that really made it special was the perspective of the first-person shooter. You were going through the game with the perspective of the main character. And you were doing things in that perspective. So rather than react to what would happen at the game, like Pac-Man, you had to keep following the dots and you just reacted to where the dots. You would make your decisions on doing this or doing that, and you traveled through the game as the character and as the shooter. And that was a revelation. And the way that they pulled it off, the way that Valve put together all of the elements of it. And by the way, if you remember the game, as you would go through something, you would look over to the left or the right, and suddenly out of nowhere, this monster would come and like eat one of your coworkers. You know, it's just amazing. Those kind of things made it what it was. But it was your perspective, and you could go back and replay. It was amazing. It was so successful that they decided to introduce expansion packs. And they retained a separate company, actually a separate studio, Gearbox, and they made expansion packs called Opposing Force and Blue Shift. What was interesting about Opposing Force and Blue Shift, that both of those were actually scientific terms. One was for the Doppler effect, and one was for a physics rationale or a physics rule, opposing force. But essentially, the same story arc unfolded with those two expansion packs, but from the perspective of a different character. So now you could go through the game again, but this time through this character, and this time through this character. And that introduces the whole notion of expansion packs was tremendous. It allowed people to experience the game in different ways. It also allowed coders to go in and make their own updates using the engine called mods. And the modding community, as it would be called, embraced it. And the result was not only mods, but completely new standalone games. If you think back to the origins of these guys, right? From Microsoft Windows was like a platform that, sure, they had their own products like Excel and Word and things like that, but they also allowed you with Microsoft Windows to make other things that you thought would be interesting on the platform of Windows. Well, likewise, the mods on the platform of Half-Life, it was like an open environment where you were invited to come in and build something using the framework. Unlike music, where when it's done, it's a closed thing and it's finished. And if we know anything about the history of music, people made mods based on music. They were called rap songs, and they would sample things about songs from years gone by, and there would be lawsuits. Hey man, you stole part of my work and you're doing it, because music was a closed and finished environment. The gaming community encouraged expression and creating mods. That was a pioneering difference in what you did with the finished artwork. And so now you also have this interesting thing is the Quake engine that led to Valve in the building of Half-Life. Now Half-Life had an engine that was leading to mods that were just tremendous. You know, what I think was most interesting about it was, if you think about the mods back in those days, Day of Defeat was set in World War II, and I really liked that mod. I really wasn't into Half-Life, but when Day of Defeat came out, I did play Day of Defeat, the World War II mod on Half-Life. But other people were completely into a thing called Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike would lead to a series of mods, which would also lead to Valve actually recruiting and bringing the entire Counter-Strike creative team on board, and then standalone products. So it shows you that, look at the smarts of that. It actually leads to somebody coming in. That would be like Van Halen inviting people to come in and create music based on Eddie Van Halen's riffs. Then they create their own stuff, and then Van Halen invites them into the band and builds albums that Van Halen owns. As you can see, it just doesn't happen in other creative mediums. But it certainly did in the gaming medium, and it certainly did with Half-Life. What started as a Quake engine was now its own engine and spawning things, and it was just absolute success story. What was interesting is there would be one more page in the chapter here. Valve would go on to create Steam. And Steam was a complete digital distribution platform that had digital rights management, had multiplayer gaming, and social elements. So guess what? Learning from their roots, they created sort of the Microsoft Windows of gaming called Steam. And that, my friend, is the story of Valve and Half-Life, taking an engine from id, their Microsoft roots, all the way through the success of Half-Life and its mods, ultimately resulting in a platform called Steam. As I wrap up, let's go back to those 3 points I mentioned. First, passion is indispensable. And we can see how even though the Valve guys were software guys and not gaming guys, they had a passion for gaming and they would take that forward. Second, when you enter a sector, know everything you can possibly know about it and go learn from people. They learned from John Carmack and even got the suggestion to use his Quake Engine as the heart and the original seed of their launch. And then third, if your product's late, it's only late for a short time, but if it sucks, it's gonna suck forever. And Valve refused to put out a product in 1997 that they didn't think was great. Instead, by November of 1998, they had actually rebuilt part of it, their passion in tow, and they put out a product that was great and changed the PC gaming industry. And I think we can learn things from that, whether you're running a small company in Indianapolis, Indiana, or you're building what you hope to be a huge gaming company. These lessons, I think, apply to you. And for that, that's our case study for today. And we have Paul. Boom. All right. Good toss this time. Thank you for watching Case Studies with the BizDoc here on Valuetainment. Please subscribe because we're on a mission, thanks to you, to hit 1 million subscribers by the end of the year. And until next time in another case study, I'm Tom Ellsworth and I hope I left you better than I found you.